So today I want to talk about disruption. And a lot of people talk about disruption. They talk about industries and businesses and the whole world being disrupted, but not many people talk about what you can do about it. They simply say the world is coming to an end. There's nothing we can do. And today I want to give you a little bit of an insight into how to handle disruption. So I'm going to talk about these 6 kinds of disruptive forces that affect pretty much every business and every industry now. So it's quite broad, but it'll help you identify the 6 different kinds of disruptors you could have in your business. Then we'll dig into one of them. So given our limited time, we don't have time to look at all 6 in detail, but I'll give you a strategy for dealing with one of them. I think it's one of the probably the most interesting ones, and one that most people and most businesses don't know how to handle because it seems like it's quite random. So first of all, let's look at what those 6 kinds of disruptive forces are. So if you look at who are the disruptors to your business or to your industry, I reckon there are 6 of them, and it's like climbing a mountain. So the first 3 that you can see on the way up, you can see them. They might be quite a challenge for you, and you may be wondering how you're going to tackle them, but at least you can see them. And these ones are competitors, dominators, and startups. On the other side of the mountain, the 3 that you can't see but could be a bigger risk for you, but also a bigger opportunity, are the upstarts, the randoms, and the terminators. So let me tell you briefly what they are, and then we'll do a little bit of a survey around them. So first of all, let's go in this order. So first of all, your competitors, they're your traditional disruptors. These are the people that you're fighting with for market share within your industry. They may be established or they may be new competitors, but they're kind of doing the same thing that you are, maybe with some variations, but you know them. They're your current competitors. The next kind are the dominators. So this is when the big guys move into town. It could be Amazon moving into retail, as is happening in Australia. It could be Google moving into banking. It could be the government or industry regulators changing the rules for everybody in the industry. And everyone has to comply because they're the dominators. The third kind are the startups, and you've probably seen these, and you've seen lots and lots of examples of them. The small, nimble, agile, flexible startup companies that are competing with established people. So one of my favorite examples is this, a live call. So the established people are the cardiologists who have a lot of expertise, have a lot of experience, and they're the ones who traditionally have been doing things like ECGs to monitor people with heart conditions. But now there's this little device you attach to the back of your iPhone called a live call, and you can do, if you've got a heart condition, you as a patient can do an ECG yourself. You just touch the back of the phone and it does an ECG, sends the data remotely to a monitoring center, and they can notify your GP or a cardiologist if there are any sort of problems. The next kind, now we're looking at the other side of the mountain, are the upstarts, which are startups which don't play by the rules. So these are the Ubers and the Airbnbs who start off by being illegal quite often in some countries and some jurisdictions, but they provide such a compelling experience that they force governments and societies to change. And it seems really unfair because they're operating on an uneven playing field because they're operating outside the rules, whereas you're trying to play within the rules. But here they are. They're upstarts. They're like startups, but they can operate outside the rules, and they bend the rules or break the rules until they force people to change. The next kind are the randoms. So these are industries or businesses that disrupt you without even trying. So my insurance is with the AIA, and as part of my insurance, as part of my membership of AIA, I get 10% discount or 10% rebate on every time I book a Qantas flight. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, and it's certainly not disrupting the insurance industry. It's not even disrupting the airline industry, but think about travel agents. Many travel agents operate on much smaller margins than 10%, especially on just basic domestic flights. And here's this insurance industry that's coming along and disrupting them without even trying. They don't care about travel agents. They're just coming along and offering something that's a benefit to their members and their customers, but they're completely sideswiping another industry, which is the travel agents industry. So that's an example of a random. And the last one is like randoms on steroids. So these are the terminators. These are the radical technologies that will completely destroy an industry or completely or radically change it. So driverless cars are examples that they affect a number of industries, not just car manufacturing, which is the obvious one. And by the way, if you're in Perth, you get the chance to use a driverless car. And I think they've just started this in Sydney as well. So in Perth, they've got the RAC, which is our local automobile club, has got a free service where you can go and try out sitting in a driverless bus, and you go up and down like a 20-minute ride. It's great. And if you're in Perth or now in Sydney, I recommend you try it. And the reason these are Terminators, that the whole driverless car technology, is because they affect a number of industries. Obviously, car manufacturing, and all of the major car manufacturers are looking into driverless autonomous technology, but also things like car insurance, because you don't need to get car insurance anymore because you're not the driver. And parking, you don't need to go and park your car because the driverless car comes along, drops you off, and then goes off to pick up somebody else. And the parking industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's going to be affected by driverless cars. Accommodation, so you may not have to stay overnight in a hotel because you get into your car the night before and you program the destination, you go to sleep in your car. And cars can be more comfortable than they are now because they don't need to look like cars do now. And then, of course, on a more morbid note, things like cemeteries, funeral directors, accident and emergency wards in hospitals are affected because there'll be fewer deaths on the road and fewer accidents because self-driving cars are already safer than having humans behind the wheel. I mean, it doesn't make sense for many of us to spend 2 hours a day operating heavy machinery when we could be investing our time doing other things, and in a much safer way as well. Okay, so those are the 6 disruptive forces that could affect your business, your industry, and I wonder which ones are the most relevant for you. So in Business Accelerators, one of the things we do is we ask people, like, is your business fit for the future, and which of these 6 disruptors is going to be the most it's going to have the biggest impact on you. And for each of those 6, there's a different strategy that you use to tackle them. So one of the things we do in Business Accelerators is we give people this survey at the start. Don't worry if you can't read it because we're not going to go through it in detail. But there's these 30 questions for 5 in each area. And you identify out of 10, how ready are you? How fit are you for being disrupted in that area? So obviously, given our limited time, we're not going to go through 30 questions. But what I figured out I'd do for you is, rather than try to cover them very broadly and superficially, let's drill down into one of them. So I'm going to pick one of these 6 areas, and I've got 5 poll questions for you, which are the exact same questions that we ask in that area. So get ready to answer to respond to these polls. And so what we've got are 5 questions. And each of them, I'm going to ask you to rate it 0, 1, or 2. Okay, so get ready to answer the poll. I'll bring up the poll in a sec, but let me explain how it works. So there's going to be 5 questions. Each one of them you can rate a 0, 1, or a 2. So 0 says, like, for example, this one, we regularly explore innovations outside our industry. 0 goes, no, we don't, or rarely we do. 1 means, yeah, we kind of do that, sometimes maybe, and 2 goes, yep, absolutely, we do that, and it's one of our primary objectives to do that regularly. Okay, so we've got 5 questions. Each of them is going to have the same set of answers from 0 to 2. So let's start the first one. Okay, and because they're just 0 to 2, it should be pretty quick for you to answer the question. So filling the poll is all anonymous, and just tick one of those options. Okay, great. Thank you so much for people doing it quickly. All right, and I generally wait for about 80% of people to have voted, which has happened now. So let me close that poll. And I'll quickly share the results just so you can see out of interest what people have said. Yeah, so about half the people have said they're in the, yeah, you kind of do that. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one is we encourage our people, and this is not yourself, but people in your team. And even if you're a solopreneur, there are other people like freelancers, contractors that you work with. So do you encourage your people to share interesting ideas they find from outside work and bring them into the workplace and share them with you and share them with the rest of the team? Okay, so let me launch this poll. So again, you've got the choices 0, 1, or 2. Great. Thank you for voting quickly. Okay, good. Okay, so in this case, more people say yes. Fantastic. All right, let's continue. By the way, I hope you're keeping score for yourself, because what's going to happen at the end is you're going to end up with a score out of 10 for yourself. And that's really what you're looking for. We're looking for this score out of 10. Okay, number 3 is, do you regularly provide opportunities for your people, which is not you, but the rest of your team, to learn new skills? So in other words, in the workplace, it might be through training courses that you send them on. It might be online training. It might be mentoring. It might be getting them to shadow you, things like that. Okay, so how often do you provide opportunities for people to learn new skills as part of their work? And of course, that means providing the resources for them, whether it's time, money, and the environment where they feel encouraged to do that. Okay, great. Thank you for voting quickly. Let me share those results. Okay, again, great. So this is really pleasing to see that most people do that. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So the next one is, do you encourage your people, again, not yourself as a leader, but your other people in your team, to join external communities and networks? So, for example, my PA, my business manager, Emma, has just joined a group called Little Black Dress, which is a group for high-profile business women who get together. It's run by Janine Garner, fantastic program, and I very, very much encourage Em to join that, because it doesn't really necessarily help my business, but it certainly helps her in her professional development, and maybe there's some ideas that she'll bring back that'll be useful for the business as well. In fact, with Emma, it's not a maybe, she'll definitely bring back ideas as well, but mainly it's for her to join a community or network outside what I can offer her. Okay, so I see about half the people have voted here, so this is maybe a little bit of a trickier one to answer. Okay, great. So we're up to 80%, so let me show you those results. Okay, again, really pleasing to see that more than half the people here do offer that to their people. Okay, and the last one. So this is about innovation. Do you give your people, your team members, time, permission, and an environment for innovation? So this is being proactive about innovation rather than just letting it happen randomly. So let me launch that poll, which is our last one. Okay, great. Let me show you the results. Most people have voted. Yeah, okay, so this is one which I think has the highest score for the no's. But again, it's pleasing to see that more than 1 in 3 are saying, yes, we absolutely do. Okay, so thank you very much for playing along with that. That's really good. And I'm less interested in what we scored as a group, and I'm more interested for you to be able to look at your own score. And for each one of those 5, if you add up your score, you'll get a score out of 10. And what we've done, those 5 questions are the questions under this area of randoms. So let's dig a little bit deeper into randoms now. So randoms, if you remember that example I gave you with Qantas and AIA, these are random technologies that could affect you. The reason I picked this one is because when I've done this survey, and we do this in business accelerators, I also do this with conference audiences and clients, and generally, based on the overall stats, that if you do the complete survey of all 6 areas, most people end up scoring the lowest in these 3 in the middle: the startups, upstarts, and randoms. So all the others, they score the scores are pretty low, because this is a score out of 10, and even the highest is below 7. So that's good. I think it's good that people are being honest and are not being overly optimistic about what they do. But the 3 weakest are these 3 kind of in the middle. So these are, if I show you the mountain again, it's these 3 here which tend to be the weakest. So let's look at one of them, and I'm going to pick the one that I think is like it's furthest along the mountain, so I think is probably the most challenging for most businesses. And let's dig a little bit deeper into random. So what can you do as a strategy to manage the random businesses or industries that could disrupt you? So given your score out of 10, this will give you an idea of how ready you are. So if you scored really high, like 8, 9, or 10, that means you're pretty well set to deal with the randoms. Not 100% guaranteed, but you're pretty well set. If you scored low, and I've actually seen a few people have been putting their scores in the question box, which I didn't ask for, but thank you for the people who are doing that. If you scored low out of 10, then maybe it's a really good chance for you to perhaps apply this strategy that we're going to talk about in the next 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, and the strategy is to use the skill of transdisciplinarity. Now, the skill of transdisciplinarity is one of the 10 skills that the Institute for the Future identified as skills for the future workforce. These are the things that are more difficult to automate, more difficult to outsource, the things that will help you and your team become future-proof. It's a big word, and I think of it as simply being a connector. So how do you look at other technology and trends, other things that are happening outside your industry, outside your business, and connect them to yours? Because remember, randoms are these random things that could hit you from the side. So there's no way to 100% protect yourself against them. However, you can leverage the opportunity by looking at what's happening outside your industry and figuring out how it can apply to you. So let me show you one example from one industry, and then I've got a little bit of an interactive exercise for you to think about how you can apply it to yours. Not only think about it, but I'm going to ask you to share as well. So before we do that, are there any questions about on what we've covered so far? So we looked at the 6 disruptive forces. We looked at, you've given yourself an assessment of where you, of how well you rate on one of them, which is randoms. And we're just about to do an exercise talking about, give you an example of how to incorporate randoms into your business or industry. So let me quickly just stop and see if there's any questions, and then we'll jump into this exercise. Okay, Jim says that all of these disruptors are also opportunities. Absolutely right. Okay, so disruptors don't only have to be threats, they can be opportunities as well. Okay, good. Not sure how to apply this to solopreneurs. So these absolutely do apply to solopreneurs. So some of the questions the questions I asked you are about teams, and even as a solopreneur, you have people in your team. Now there may be freelancers, so it may be somebody that you've just outsourced work to on Fiverr or Upwork, but are they part of your team? If you got suppliers, do you see them as part of your team, or do you see them as outside your team? And the more that you bring them into your team, or at least perceive them as being in your team, the better. So it actually does apply to solopreneurs as well. And solopreneurs have some advantages because you tend to be nimble and agile, but also some disadvantages in that you don't always have other people regularly that you're working with who can bring in these new ideas. So yeah, thanks, Justice, for asking that question. Okay, let's do the exercise. So let me show you first one example of how you can connect things from other industries. So when I speak at healthcare conferences, I often show this example. So this is like, think of this as maybe 5 years in the future. Somebody's having a heart attack, they'll have a driverless ambulance that comes along and picks them up. So it doesn't need a driver. Maybe there's still a paramedic, but it doesn't need a driver, and it doesn't need flashing lights and a siren, because you can imagine that all the cars on the road are driverless, and so they all know, because they're all wirelessly connected, they know to give way to ambulances and fire engines and emergency vehicles. Along the way, there'll be a chip implanted under the patient's skin that will send data automatically to artificial intelligence software in the cloud, like that Alive Core, but it happens automatically. And that'll tell the cardiologist exactly what to do. It'll do a diagnosis, tell the cardiologist, so she's ready when the patient arrives on the doorstep. Also, in the ambulance, there'll be a 3D printer that'll print a stent for that patient, for that operation. So again, it's ready for the cardiologist. And any other equipment and medical supplies that are required, the hospital doesn't have to carry inventory anymore. It's delivered to the hospital arriving at the same time as the ambulance by drone. So all of the technology exists at the moment. It's not necessarily connected into healthcare that way, but anybody who's working in healthcare should be thinking about some of this technology. And maybe all of that will become obsolete a few years after that when you have this, which is nanotechnology robotic surgery. So you're having a heart attack, you swallow a tiny pill, and this tiny army of robots goes to work inside you doing the operation. Okay, so what could possibly go wrong in that scenario? Okay, so that's an example from healthcare of some of this technology. So what I'd like to do now is ask you. I'm going to turn the spotlight back on you now and ask you, what about you? So in your business, in your industry, how could it could be any technology, but let's use the technology that I've shown you, that I've showcased as an example here. Let's use that as an example. So just for a very quick exercise for you to exercise transdisciplinarity in this webinar, I'd like you to go to that website that's on your screen now, which is called askgihan.com. Now, when you go there, don't press anything just yet, but when you go there, and in fact, let me do that here so you can see it in your in the webinar window. So I've set up those 5 bits of technology: self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, drones, and tiny robots. And what I'd like you to do is don't press this big plus button here. That's what I'd normally ask you to do. But in this one, I'd like you to just add a comment to one of these, or more than one if you want to, ideas in here. So don't put anything in the comment box, in the question box in the webinar control panel. Add your comment here. So self-driving cars, I might say, for my business as a professional speaker, what's an impact of self-driving cars? People watching videos in their car. So they might be watching my presentation in their car. I might look at drones and say, as a professional speaker, doing live infomercials with product delivery. Okay, so I could do an infomercial, and people buy something online, watching a video, and it gets delivered to them instantly because there's a little drone that comes along and delivers it to their house immediately. Okay, so go ahead and do that. So just keep adding comments, and as you can see, the way I've done it is I've said, here's my business or my role or my job as a professional speaker, and then how could drones affect it? So here's an idea. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. As you add comments, you'll see them coming up on the screen. They'll all come up as anonymous, but that doesn't matter. I'm less interested in your name, but more interested in your business and the impact that you might see. Okay, so I'll just give that a couple of minutes to run. So as I said, just go to askgihan.com and just think about how this could affect your business. And some of it might not be practical or realistic straight away, but the idea of transdisciplinarity is that you don't only look at what's possible now, you're looking ahead at the future. And that's the whole idea about not being about being ready for disruption, because what you're trying to do is project and see what comes up next. Okay, so here's somebody here who's a practice manager. Yeah, 3D printing to assist GPs with various treatments. Good. Okay, so just let me stop talking for a couple of minutes while that happens. Okay, fantastic, everyone. Thank you very much for taking part in that. And this skill, this exercise with transdisciplinarity, is something that's worth doing, not just in today's webinar, but also doing with your team. One of my friends, Niels Vesk, who's an innovation expert, he says that one of the easiest things that businesses can do to innovate is in their weekly or fortnightly staff meetings, just spend 5 minutes just saying, does anyone see something interesting in the last week that they saw in their, in their personal life that might be relevant for us? And it may not even be relevant, but something interesting that they've seen. It might be something that they saw on Facebook. It might be something that they saw in their local cafe. It might be something they saw on the news, and then figuring out how that could be related to your business. And so that's what this is. This is all about transdisciplinarity. So it's great to see the comments coming here. Thank you very much for doing that. Remember, this is all on your web browser. So if you want to take a snapshot of that, you can do that, and then you get all the responses there. So just to finish up, because we've covered quite a bit today. And but by the way, if anyone is interested in the Business Accelerators program, we're only running it in Perth at this stage. But if you're in Perth and you'd like to get a complimentary invitation to come along to our next one, which is actually next Friday. So it's Friday next week, the 10th of November. We've got a couple of spaces left. The last one we sold out last month, so we've moved to bigger premises. So we do have a couple of spaces left. Just check out businessaccelerators.com.au and just send me a private note, send me an email or a message in the question box, and I'll send you an invitation. Come along with my compliments. So just to finish off, I know we did a couple of little interesting exercises here. I hope you got some value from doing the polls and rating yourself, and also putting your creative mind to work in figuring out whether you can use the skill of transdisciplinarity to find some technology and trends that could affect your business. I also want to say that this is not something that you just do in a half-hour webinar. I hope that you do take this and put it into action in your business as well, and do it regularly. The recording of this will be available for you later if you want to go back through any of the material, but I really encourage you to set aside time in your business to exercise this skill regularly, and I hope you find it useful. Thanks everyone for coming along. Hope you enjoyed the webinar, and especially for taking part. Thank you very much for doing that, and I'll see you in a month's time. Thanks everyone, and bye for now.